I'm so excited to be here. I'm also excited that you all woke up. That's amazing. You should, like, seriously give yourselves a round of applause. That's really incredible. Day 3 of the conference. Okay, I'm not going to delay much further. All right, let's get started with an animated guide to Vue 3 reactivity and internals. What happens in the exact moment where you understand a new idea? Can you think back to the last time that you had that moment where something clicked for you? Many people call it an aha moment, or they liken it to a light bulb turning on, because it feels a little bit like that. It feels like someone turned on a light in a previously dark space in your mind. Many people say it's one of the happiest feelings they've felt in their lives. And that makes sense because neurologically speaking, you feel a surge of dopamine in concert with a serotonin response. Your body literally rewards you for making a new connection and activates adrenaline to make you feel more awake and alert. So what does this have to do with reactivity? Well, consider that aha moment in the moment that you understood one of your tools or an application. In your journey to getting something done, you felt everything was at your fingertips. Our jobs as developers is to provide the tools necessary to get people to this moment, to make them feel like nothing is in their way and that everything that a UI provides is right there in front of them, that they have superpowers to getting things done. This is important because without a focus on what we're building and how well our tools manage state, what we spend our time creating can be confusing or awkward. Ideally, we don't want to show people everything at once, but only the information that they need. And in order to do that well, we have to respond to change. What does that look like when done well? Well, responding to change with fluidity can feel like everything that you touch responds immediately and elegantly, and you know where everything is going and how to retrieve everything once it's gone. Conversely, when we build UIs poorly, they can feel unintuitive. I don't know what's going to happen at this hotel. It's like a horror movie is going to take place here or something, and then, what? Yikes, okay. Or maybe we don't know how to support the user and we tell them too much. But things that respond well feel so good. Things are hidden from view until we need them. You're not scanning over an environment that has too much information for you. Everything responds just in the moment that you need it. It feels very fluid. So all this is fine and good. But how do we make that happen as developers? Well, this is one of the reasons why Vue is such a lovely framework to work with. It responds elegantly to changes in the UI and gives us everything that we need to make powerful interfaces without anything getting in our way. But how? How does it do all of these amazing things while keeping the Surface API so seamless? Today, we're going to find out how by diving into an animated guide to Vue 3. I'm Sarah Drasner. I'm on the Vue core team. I'm a VP of Developer Experience at Netlify, which is neither Netflix or Shopify, as much as that's super confusing for my parents. If you're not familiar with Netlify, it's my favorite way to deploy sites and apps. A few people talked about it earlier yesterday, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit today. But I'm going to walk through a ton of stuff today, and I want you to know that all of the demos for this talk were written in JavaScript and are all open source. Some of them are using some of the same premises we're going to talk about today, which makes it really meta. I'm going to show some disparate concepts sort of in an FAQ format. And what I mean by that is that people ask me questions about Vue 3 all the time, and so I'm going to take some of the most frequently asked questions and address them today and break them down into the most simple parts that I can. But one thing to note is that everything that I'm going to show you is interrelated. They all work in concert together to create a single experience. Okay, let's dive in. What is reactivity? The canonical example that everyone uses, because it's a great one, is an Excel spreadsheet. If I have these two numbers and I create a sum, I can create the sum here. If I adjust that first cell to 3, I don't have to do anything to adjust that final one, right? It just updates accordingly. That's awesome. That's a really good example of reactivity. But JavaScript doesn't really work like this usually, right? What we have is 2 and 3, and then we have sum is 5. If I reassign the value of 3 and print out sum again, it's not going to reassign, right? That's not how JavaScript works. So how are we going to do that in Vue? Well, if we wanted to do this in JavaScript, what we would have to do to get it done is to detect when there's a change in one of the values. We'd have to track the function that changes it, and then we'd have to trigger that function that changes it so it can update the final value. So that's how we would normally make things done. So how does Vue 3 do this? Let's dive in. So we're going to get this done with proxies, and I made an animated explainer to kind of show you at a high level what's going on. We start with an object. We add a handler and a proxy to the object. In this case, it's the same. But look, we can intercept the object with this proxy. But here's the cool part. If we change the first object, the proxied object updates accordingly without adjusting the handler. With reactivity, we can respond to changes instantly. Cool. So that was kind of quick and high level, right? Let's dive in a little bit further. And in order to explore this concept, let's talk about what proxies are and what they can do in general. A proxy is an object that encases another object or function and allows you to intercept it. And at its base core, this is what that syntax looks like. New proxy, target, and handler. So if we have something like this, our dinner is going to be tacos, because tacos are wonderful. And we have a handler, and we have a get method. And we pass in the target and prop. If we use square bracket notation, we can return and get the value. So if I have something like this, const proxy equals new proxy, and then I say proxy.meal, what do you think is going to happen? We get our tacos, which is great, because tacos are awesome. But if we want to intercept this value, we can actually do that quite easily. We can actually say console.log intercepted, or whatever we want to do here. And as you can see, we're printing out that intercepted and then the tacos. Cool. So what happens if we don't return that square bracket notation of target prop? Well, we can totally do something else. We don't actually have to return that. We can return whatever we want in this area. So if I wanted to swap out your dinner and you were expecting tacos and I wanted to give you a burger, I could totally do that. I could say, we swapped out your dinner, and I return a burger, and that's what it would print out. We swapped out your burger. And that's awful, right? In JavaScript, we call this a trap. Because it's a trap. Who's going to give me a burger instead of a taco? That's ridiculous. I don't want that to happen. But anyway, so this kind of interception is called a trap in JavaScript. All right, let's go back to this first example. Here we were returning with that square bracket notation, but there's another way that we could return here, and actually we're going to use it. And this is intrinsic to proxies. This is something that only proxies allows you to do. We can say return reflect.get and spread in the arguments. And one of the arguments that you might see here that we added was this receiver. The reason why we might use this instead of the way that we were returning earlier is that this reflect that proxies offers us allows us to bind this properly, which is really nice for Vue, because that's what we need to do with Vue in order to make everything work properly. We need to bind all of this in JavaScript. Cool. So now let's talk through what we might need to do in order to get that cool reactivity that we were talking about before. We might need to track anything that's going to change, any kind of changes that are going to happen to those properties. We want to track in that get method. And so if you're looking inside the Vue code base and you find that track piece, that's what that is doing. That's what we call it, is we're tracking any changes, which are called effects. So we're going to track any effects. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set some values. So we're also going to, again, use the receiver and we're going to use reflect. But above that, we're going to use trigger. And what trigger is going to do is run the changes. We're going to run the effects. We're going to run anything that needed to be updated inside of that. So here, what we're going to do is do a simple check. We're not going to run all of that if we don't need to, right? If the old value is the same as the new value, we don't want to do that work. So we're just going to do a simple check. Is the old value the same as the new value? Okay, great. If not, then we're going to trigger this. Cool. So let's go back to that original statement of what we need to do to change a value in JavaScript. We need to detect when there's a change in one of the values. We don't have to do that anymore because we're using proxies, that's happening automatically. Cool. The next thing is that we're going to track the function that changes it, and that is called track in Vue 3. We're going to trigger the function so that it can update the final value. That is called trigger in Vue 3. And that function that changes it is called effect. I'm going to use that word a few times. But if you need to look and see any of these things, you can go find them in the code base that way. So other Vue 3 reactivity notes. In this version of Vue, reactivity is in a separate package inside the Vue Next repo. And the Vue Next repo is now open to the public. So if you want to go check it out after this talk or at any point in your lives, you can go right here, and that's where that package is, and now you know what to kind of look for to understand those changes. Another thing to note is proxies are ES6, so they don't offer support back into old versions of IE. We previously used object.define property, and now for modern browsers, we're allowed to use things like proxy and reflect. Cool, let's move on. How do watchers work? Okay, that's all fine and good, but how do the proxies relate to the actual changes that are happening in the DOM updates? How do we hook into them with watchers? And if you're not familiar with watchers, here's how they work. Anytime we change this property, we've got this counter at 0, but if we increase it or decrease it, you can see I'm watching that property. Anytime that property changes, I can console log, but I can also do tons of other things. It allows me to hook into that change. And before we dive into all of these concepts, there are a couple pieces of JavaScript that you should understand before we talk about those. There are a set of base concepts to understand. Get it? Set? Anyway, in order to understand the inner workings, let's talk about set, map, and weak map. All right, set. A set is a series of only values, similar to an array, where any particular value can only be inserted once. So what does that mean? So if I have a new set of taco, burger, taco, and I console log my lunch items here, the output is just going to be taco and burger. I can't keep adding more tacos, sadly. I can only get that once. A map is a series of keys and values, similar to an object, but with some main differences. And there's a bunch of differences, but I'm going to talk about the ones that are most pertinent to Vue 3. Key value pairs, remember, they're explicit ordering. They perform better in scenarios where there's frequent additions and deletions. Like set, you can only add the key value pairs one time. And it has some really nice methods like size, has, set, clear, and you can delete by the key. So just like set, in map, if I take a new map and then I set my first lunch is tacos, my second lunch is hamburgers, and then I try to add lunch 1 as tacos again, it's just going to throw that away, right? Where we've just got lunch 1 and lunch 2. It doesn't add it again, right? Great. A weak map. It's similar to a map, but the references are held weakly. And what I mean by that is if you delete something, the reference can be garbage collected. In a map, it can't. But that also means it loses some things that map has. So it loses the implicit ordering. It loses those nice methods like has and size and things like that. So the difference here with weak map is garbage, literally garbage. But more like a happy kind of garbage because we're able to garbage collect it. So this makes Vue much faster, and I'll show you why. All right, let's talk about what happens with those proxies for the DOM. When you pass an object into a Vue instance as data, Vue converts it into a proxy. This proxy enables Vue to perform dependency tracking and change notification when properties are accessed or modified. There are 2 levels of dependencies for every component. The first level uses map and stores the dependency for each property. The second level uses set to track the effects that will be run when the values change. After the first render, the component will have tracked a list of dependencies, the properties that it accessed during the render. Conversely, the component becomes a subscriber to each of these properties. When a proxy intercepts a set operation, the property will notify all of its subscribed components to re-render. Vue Reactivity efficiently tracks changes in our application. And for each one of these components, we place them in a weak map so that we can delete them as needed. Great. So we went through a lot of proxy things. We went through a lot of reactivity things. It's pretty high level if you want to dig in any further. Vue Mastery has a great course on this that I highly suggest you check out. It's really, really awesome. You heard from Greg yesterday. It's really great. Okay, on to the next. We talked about reactivity and watchers and how they all work with all of our properties, but how do the properties get to the DOM? How are these changes actually getting reflected? That's a good little proxy joke, yeah? Reflected. Anyway, in our interfaces. So now let's cover, how does the virtual DOM work? You might have heard this phrase before, the virtual DOM or the VDOM. It's a concept that many JavaScript frameworks use to create really performant UIs, not just Vue. So let's dig in. Okay, so here's the DOM. We make a copy in JavaScript called the virtual DOM. We do this because touching the DOM with JavaScript is computationally expensive. While performing updates in JavaScript is cheap, finding the required DOM nodes and updating them with JavaScript is expensive. So we batch calls and change the DOM all at once. The virtual DOM is a lightweight JavaScript object created by this render function. It takes 3 arguments, the element, an object with data, props, attributes, and more, and an array. The array is where we pass in the children, which all have these arguments too. So here's the text in the div, and its child, the UL, and now in turn the children, the LIs. And if we need to update the list items, we do so in JavaScript, and only then do we update the actual DOM. The virtual DOM allows us to make performant updates to our UI. Cool? Awesome. All right, so now that we've talked about the virtual DOM, you might say, like, but what about things that are pre-rendered? What about things that are server-side rendered? What about things that are already pre-compiled and everything is done once it hits the client? So a question I get about this is like, wait, how does that virtual DOM work and all of that reactivity work if you're just delivering static content? And what is this hydration thing that I keep hearing about? So I get this question a lot when I talk about Nuxt or Gridsome, which are awesome meta frameworks. But before we talk about hydration, let's first cover why it's necessary. So why Jamstack? With a client-side rendering solution, the server delivers a file without content until you fetch everything and the browser compiles it. And if you're far away from the server, the latency for that request gets really long. With older server-side rendering solution, the server compiles and fetches everything and builds the website and delivers a fully populated HTML page. So that's much faster. But every time you navigate to a new route, the server has to do it all over again, compile and fetch it all and deliver it. This process delays the load, sometimes by whole seconds. Recently, an approach called Jamstack has become popular, which addresses both issues. We build the whole site and deploy the content to CDNs, which means it's geo-replicated across the globe, and we never go back to a server on subsequent requests. We call it Jamstack and not static because it extends beyond static. We can make the page dynamic with API calls or serverless functions, like Roman did, and the user can interact with it. What's more, because there's no server involved, there are fewer attack vectors. So Jamstack approaches can improve performance and security. My favorite version of this is using nuxt in universal rendering mode, coupled with a generate command to pre-build all the pages. I love deploying it on Netlify. That's why I asked them to work there, which also offers some serverless functions to make things dynamic. And the pairing is just a really awesome developer experience. But of course, as we're working within the confines of a conference, new things are coming out all the time. So this is no longer the way to do things. As of yesterday, as we heard from Sebastian, we are now going to set the target to static, and we're going to use nuxt build and nuxt export in order to use their static version. And that's 2.12, I think. I'm looking at Sebastian in the audience. Okay. So, okay, why do we do all of that? We are no longer having a single point of origin server where however your proximity to it is however fast the connection is. It doesn't need to make subsequent requests, and it's better security because they don't have access to the server. So that gives us amazing performance and better security. That's pretty awesome. So how does it become interactive if it's all statically rendered? That's where this hydration comes in. It can speed up performance to initially serve raw HTML and CSS. We can do this by server-side rendering an app and delivering it statically. After it's been served, Vue needs to take over the elements that are dynamic. This is called hydration. Since the markup's been rendered, we don't throw that away and recreate it. Instead, we want to hydrate the DOM and make it interactive. Here, the button can now respond to changes, and we can add to the cart. Hydration lets us deliver fast and secure sites and still have a reactive UI. So basically, it walks over that DOM, figures out what's different in terms of what needs to be reactive and what's not. It doesn't throw the DOM away, and it creates reactive bits from those pieces. Okay, we learned a lot in a half an hour. All right, we covered how reactivity works, how Vue 3 uses proxies, how watchers work in Vue 3, how the virtual DOM works in Vue 3, how and why Nuxt and Gridsome use pre-rendered content and how they then hydrate the DOM. That's fantastic. It's very early in the morning and you all made it here. That's all great. Now we know so many things and our boundaries are endless. And if you ever need access to these materials to review, I've collected all the materials here. They're all open source. You can dive into the code for how I built them, and you can explore them. And soon they'll all be part of our new reactivity section coming in the upcoming revised Vue docs as well. And not only can you make beautiful performant experiences on the web, you know how reactive premises and concepts are keeping your users focused, on task, and enabling them to have superpowers while they traverse your applications. Thank you.